Honourable Member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, decades of poor public policy in the post-secondary sector has created a generation of debt slaves and perpetuated inequality in our society. The conservative approach to funding higher education has created a lost generation. Students with high tuition fees, saddled with lots of debt, unable to buy a house, unpaid internships, and a bad job market. What a combination. Skyrocketing tuition fees and loan-based financial assistance have pushed student debt to historic levels. Education costs continue to grow faster than inflation. The economy is a lot weaker than it was in the early 2000s. The capacity of graduates to repay their loans has quickly diminished. When our finance minister was in university, the average price of tuition was about $500, and adjusted for inflation, that would be about $3,000 today. In stark contrast, the average Canadian student pays over $6,000 per year now, and students in Ontario pay $7,500 a year. This skyrocketing cost of tuition has outpaced inflation by a wide margin, more than double, Mr. Speaker. By September 2010, the total amount of student loans owed to the government reached $15 billion, the legislative ceiling set by the Canada Student Financial Assistance Act. This figure does not even include provincial or personal loans, lines of credit, or education-related credit card debt. This government altered the definition of student loan to exclude over $1.5 billion in federal student loan debt, and still it surpassed that $15 billion limit. So in response, our government amended the Canada Student Financial Assistance Act again in order to increase that limit to $19 billion, while at the same time dramatically reducing parliamentary oversight of the program. This past year, almost 500,000 students were forced to borrow funds in order to finance their education, resulting in student debt increasing by $1 million per day. The Treasury Board's proposal to write off nearly $300 million in unrecoverable student loans brings the total spent on writing off unpaid student debt to more than $1 billion in only 4 years. Clearly, financing higher education through tuition fees and debt is unsustainable and irresponsible. Sounds just like our approach to the environment, doesn't it? In the past 15 years, tuition fees for students in Thunder Bay Superior North and across Canada have grown to become the single largest expense for students. The dramatic tuition fee increases during this period were the direct result of cuts to public funding for post-secondary education, and to a somewhat lesser extent by provincial governments as well. Public funding currently accounts for an average of 57% of university and college operating funding, down from 80% just 2 decades ago. During that same period, tuition fees have grown from 14% of operating funding to over 35%, more than double. This constitutes a huge shift in Canada's post-secondary education system away from a publicly funded model toward a privatized user fee system favoring the rich. Rapidly increasing tuition fees have caused post-secondary education to become unaffordable for many low and income Canadians. The Conservative government's writing off nearly $300 million in unrecoverable student debts this year, but they've also subsidized big oil, according to the IMF, to a tune of $34 billion this year. Ottawa must change its approach. The Conservatives must change. When, Mr. Speaker, will this government learn that investing in young people, young Canadians, the future of our country, is a better investment than the corporate welfare checks Conservatives are handing out to their friends to big oil and gas and coal? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say to the honourable member that we understand as a government the importance of investing in our young people, and that's why we're doing precisely that. I invite the honourable member to take a look at the numbers. I think you will find that the evidence is clear and overwhelmingly supports the actions that our government is taking. Although I hope the honourable member is aware of the difference between federal and provincial jurisdiction, If he had done his research, he would understand that tuition rates are in fact a provincial issue. If you would like to discuss high tuition rates and bigger taxes, I suggest he speak to his Premier, Kathleen Wynne. I'm happy to say Canada's Economic Action Plan is working for students. Consider the following. Economic Action Plan 2015 proposes to provide $184 million over 4 years, starting in 2016, to expand eligibility for Canada student grants to students in short duration programs. The Prime Minister made that announcement actually in my riding of North Vancouver. The expanded eligibility for the low and middle income Canada student grants is expected to help approximately 42,000 additional students per year. Economic Action Plan 2015 proposes to provide $119 million over 4 years, starting in 2016, to reduce the expected parental contribution under the Canada Student Loans Program needs assessment process, making it easier for students to get those loans. The reduction of the parental contribution in the Canada Student Loans Needs Assessment is expected to provide increased support to approximately 92,000 students. Economic Action Plan 2015 proposes to provide $116 million over 4 years, starting in 2016, to eliminate in-study student income from the Canada Student Loans Program Needs Assessment process. We were asked by students to do this, Mr. Speaker, and we're now doing it. The elimination of the in-study income from the needs assessment is expected to increase loans amounts for an estimated 87,000 students. In case the member opposite wasn't listening, let me repeat those 3 important points. First, the expanded eligibility for low and middle income Canada student grants is expected to help approximately 42,000 additional students per year. Number 2, the reduction of the parental contribution in the Canada Student Loans Needs Assessment is expected to provide increased support to approximately 92,000 students. And number 3, the elimination of the in-study income from the needs assessment is expected to increase loan amounts for an estimated 87,000 students. Mr. Speaker, no government has done more than ours to help students. At the same time, we've shown we can do this in a fiscally responsible manner. We have balanced the federal budget, and we want to help students balance theirs. And that means staying true to our commitment to keeping taxes low and supporting families, as we have done year after year since taking office. Now that our fiscal house is in order, our new challenge is to ensure that the gains we are seeing are truly long-term and sustainable. We need to stay the course to protect the economic interests of Canadians and the security of Canada. Through a series of specifically targeted measures, we are laying the underpinnings of a strong and robust economy. In case the member was wondering, we are not just helping students short-term either. We will help students stay on top of the labour market information to find jobs that are aligned with their particular skills and abilities. We will spend $14 million a year on a new survey that will provide accurate information on demand and wages by occupation and region. Mr. Speaker, the worst thing we could do for students is to follow the NDP Liberal plan to increase taxes. Our low tax plan is working and creates jobs for students through trade, training, and tax cuts. Here's our record. We ended the Liberal practice of taxing scholarships and replaced it with a tax credit for textbooks. Student loan debt has declined by 10% in real terms. We created apprenticeship grants and loans, and over 500,000 have been given out, Mr. Speaker. Those are just some of the things that we've done for students. There's many more that I could list, but I see that my time is up. Thank you.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay.
Thank you,
North.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Roman Jakubowski, the student president at Lakehead University, and the honourable member from Thunder Bay Superior North and Sandwich Gulf Islands and the Green Party do actually believe that the feds do have a role in reducing student debt in Canada. Statistics Canada reports that students from low-income families are less than half as likely to go to university than those from high-income families. Students with little or no debt were more than twice as likely to finish their degree than students with high levels of debt. The completion rate for students with under $1,000 of debt was 71%. The completion rate for those with over $10,000 in debt was 34%. A post-secondary education has never been more necessary in Canada, and it has never been less accessible. Canadian youth are now the most indebted generation in this country's history. This debt will have far-reaching implications for Canada's economy and socio-economic equality. Mr. Speaker, when will these Conservatives start funding higher education for students across Canada in Thunder Bay, Superior North, and make Canada fairer, more effective, and have a more dynamic society and economy? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we are, in fact, funding higher education for students to the tune of $10 billion every year with our transfers to the provinces and territories. Again, Mr. Speaker, I invite the honourable member to review the facts and start getting on side to help students, as we've been doing. The expanded eligibility for low-middle income Canada student grants is expected again to help over 42,000 students. The reduction of the parental contribution in Canada student loans is expected to help 92,000 students. The elimination of the in-study income from the needs assessment is expected to help 87,000 students. And, Mr. Speaker, the worst thing we can do, again, as I mentioned, is to follow the Liberals and the NDP plan to increase taxes on Canadians, which would kill jobs and hurt students' ability to find jobs once they graduate. So here's our record. We ended the Liberal practice of taxing scholarships and replaced it with a tax credit for textbooks. The student loan debt has declined by 10% in real terms, and we created apprenticeship grants and loans, and over 500,000 have been given out. Trade, training, and tax cuts, more jobs for students. Let me reassure the honourable member that helping students remains a top priority of our government, but it's clear that our record is on one issue. When will the member opposite get on board and help support our initiatives? Thank you.